Hey peeps, welcome to History 1 and our first lecture. Yay! What do you think? Chihuahua and Multi-Poo? They're excited. The dogs are excited. Alright, so here's the thing. This is methodological tools. So all we're going to do in this lecture is talk about some terms so we can kind of set the parameters for how we're going to think about history and make sure that we have some common language, etc., etc. Also, I'm going to try and keep this lecture short because it's your first one. So I'm going to try not to talk too much. Let's see how that goes, shall we? All right, next slide. Okay, before we go on to the actual content of the lecture, we'll just start with this one. Here, while I talk, you take notes. The idea is, so either I know you went through the lecture as you take notes, then you upload them to Canvas, and that's how you get credit for the lecture. You can handwrite your notes, or you can type your notes into a Word doc or a PDF or whatever you want to do. You can upload any of those things to Canvas. People who handwrite notes usually take pictures of them and upload the JPEGs to Canvas. You can upload a Word doc, you can upload a PDF, whatever you need to do. All of your notes and all of your assignments get uploaded to Canvas. Don't email me your homework. It all goes to Canvas. I have uploads in every module, upload links. So you'll be cool. And then if you're worried about what the notes should look like, one, give yourself permission just to make your notes how you need them to be. But if you need a little help, there's some sample notes in the week 0 module. So you can go take a peek at those. Stop here, go take a peek at those and come back if you're worried. But I don't want you to be worried. You should be happy about this. Okay? Let's go on to the lecture. Yay! All right, next slide. Power. There's our first word. It seems dumb to start here. Like, we all know what power is, right? Peg, you don't need to define power for us. We're in college. We're pretty smart. Yes, you are. But the problem is we get in these history classes, and if we were in a class, and we're not because you're doing this asynchronously, or you're in your bed, or maybe it's an in-class class, but we don't do the lectures in class. Anyway, sometimes we walk into classrooms and we start to think about things in dumb ways that we wouldn't think about outside of the world. I'm not saying you're dumb. I'm saying sometimes classrooms create these weird constructs. So anyway, what you know about power is that it must be important, that people who have it have other stuff, and that people who don't have it wish they had more. It goes on and on. And indeed, for American history, really all history, but our business here is American history, power is the fundamental question. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? Who wants more? Who's resisting them? Etc., etc. So why are we talking about it? Let's go on to the next slide. Our inclination is to think that power is absolute. I don't think in our real lives, again, I think you know everything I'm about to tell you. But I think if we get in a history class or we start thinking about the past and we imagine that somehow power is absolute. Some group, the king, the czar, the rich people, the ex-rapist, no, he's not an ex-rapist, the ex-president who's a rapist, that these people have absolute power and that everybody else has no power. But you also know in your lizard brains and even in your forebrains that's not true. That never, ever, ever, as it says here in the slide, in the history of humans, has one group had all of the power and one group had none of the power. Again, I'm not saying there's never been poor power sharing or power dysfunction or power inequality. Not saying that. That would be profoundly stupid. And like you, I am not stupid. But rather that there's no time in history when some group had no power. Even women in the worst of conditions have resisted their disempowerment. Slaves resisted their disempowerment. People in Nazi Holocaust camps resisted their disempowerment. People in Gaza resist their disempowerment. People in Ukraine resist their disempowerment. People resist. So groups of people negotiate power. Resistance can be part of that negotiation. But even in a democracy, we make an agreement. If you want to think about power in government, and there's lots of power. In a democracy, we make agreements. Okay, I can't be around to make all the laws, so I'm going to give you, my congressperson or senator, the power to make those decisions for me because, I'm busy paying the mortgage. It's the same thing saying a marriage or a friendship. You negotiate that. Who's going to do what? Who's going to have, in my household, my husband has power over the stuff that happens in the garage, and I have the power over the stuff that happens in, I'm going to be honest, most of the rest of the house. That's fair, because most of it's icky stuff, like laundry and toilet cleaning and food preparation, and he wants no part of that. He's outside weed whacking right now, so maybe he has power over the grass in the yard. And then a lot of times people with less power, they will resist that because they want more power. And that sounds shitty, but it can be not shitty. If you're a slave, resisting slavery is a good thing. If you are an American in a disempowered group, the ex-president slash rapist, if he gets reelected in 2024, and man, do you need to vote. I shouldn't say this stuff because if we use this lectures after 24. Anyway, that dude, he wants to put all of the immigrants in camps. Holy Batman. But here's what I know. Immigrants and their allies, progressives, will resist that. We resist oppression. To resist oppression is to claim power. Yeah? Good. Next slide. This is just a cool picture of some slaves really violently resisting their oppression. It's a semi-famous painting of a slavery building aboard a ship where the slaves took over the ship, killed their enslavers, and sailed the ship back to Africa. How cool is that? Next slide. I just like this. This is a fairly famous painting by an African-American artist portraying a slave rebellion on a ship. And it portrays a real moment in time when the slaves rebelled against the slavers and took over the ship and sailed it back to Africa. Bye. Thanks for coming. It was a little more complicated than that, but like everything. But an admirable historical moment and a painting that quite literally vividly portrays resistance. So, worth seeing, huh? Yeah, all right, cool. Next slide. Okay, so it makes sense in a history class and in an American history class that we would go from power, who has it and who doesn't have it, and how do they negotiate it, and how do the disempowered resist, to thinking about difference. And here's the thing, I think no group in human history has been more nuanced about their thinking about difference than young Southern Californians in the 21st century. And that means y'all, unless some of you aren't young. And then you too, like me. Maybe not as old as me. Anyway, but we, again, get in these classrooms, we get in these classes, and it's easy to think that somehow difference is bad. Oh no, we're in history and we're talking about difference. It must be bad. Or the person talking about history must be bad because she shouldn't point it out. Shouldn't point out difference. Peg, what's wrong with you? But we know that not to be true. We know difference isn't bad. Look at this group of children. Oh my God, one, how cute are they? They're different in a lot of ways. They've got different racial groups, different ethnic expressions, different genders, different biological sexes, different clothes. Oh my God. And still, so cute and so delightful. And me pointing out they're different isn't bad. It's just a fact. There's nothing wrong with the fact that one is blonde and several are brunette and one might be a redhead. It's hard to tell back there. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a fact of reality. But we know that pointing that stuff out can go bad. So then the question becomes, how does it go bad? So let's go to the next slide. When I first started teaching this class about 362 years ago, okay, I exaggerate. You can tell I'm exaggerating because I'm talking. I really did. I think this was my first college class, History 1, at Mount Sac, and I think it was 28 years ago. Wow. And when I first did this lecture, I said, difference isn't bad. Difference is bad when you add value judgment. That is when you say, redheads are different from blondes, and blondes are bad because they're stupid. Oh. Okay, well that is bad, I guess. I guess. But here's the other thing. It doesn't have to be. That is bad. Saying somebody's stupid is bad. But if you say, I am a blue-haired, yes, my hair's blue, not old lady gray, it's blue. If you say blue-haired women are better than not blue-haired women, is that bad? Well, I don't know. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. Well, here, oh my goodness, look at this old woman in her superhero costume. Love that image. If I think old women are the best, it's because I am an old woman. And here's the thing: there is nothing wrong with thinking the group you belong to is good, is better. There's nothing wrong with thinking it's better to be 60 than 25. And I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't go back to 25 if you paid me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those of you in the class who are 25, but oh my goodness. Yeah, give me 60. My house is paid for. I've achieved my goals in life. I'm self-confident. I'm no longer frightened all the time. Yeah, I'm good. So here's the thing. I think it's true that all of us have to think for our own self-worth, for our self-esteem, for our mental health, have to think the group I'm in, however you define that. I am a gamer. I am a person of color. I am a woman. And there's probably lots of ways you define them. But you have to think that group is good. And indeed, maybe even that group is better than other groups. If you're a fantasy geek who likes to go to Ren fairs dressed as a unicorn, you have got to think that is freaking fantastic. And people who don't do that aren't as fantastic as me. Okay? That's fair. So adding value judgment to difference doesn't have to be bad. It can be, but it doesn't have to be, because there's nothing wrong with thinking my group is excellent. And that makes me excellent. But we still know that thinking about difference in value does go bad. So let's go to the next slide and figure out what it is. So, for example, I am an old woman. And let's say that I think old women are the best. And I do. I love being an old woman, and I think old women are fantastic. And here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Thinking I am an old woman is part of my being a happy old woman. And as long as I'm not rotten about it, it's cool. It's a key part of my identity. Thinking that your group is good is a key part of self-esteem. Yeah? Nothing wrong with that. All right, so we know it does go wrong. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, here we have the difference math. Look at this. Difference isn't bad. I've crossed that out. Difference plus value judgment. Also not bad inherently. Crossed that out. So it's difference plus value judgment plus something else. And I would like to say, solve for x. Quick, children, do the math. What is x that makes it bad? What do you got to do? This is a classroom. I would genuinely be asking this question, and you guys would toss stuff out. And somebody might even get it, because in my experience, students are pretty freaking astute. So think about, before you go on to the next slide, just for a second. So, okay, I've recognized difference. I'm a Ren Fair goer who likes to dress as a unicorn. I'm not. I do like to go to the Ren Fair, but not dressed as a unicorn. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I'm a person who goes to Ren Fairs, and I think that that is fantastic, and I love the kinds of people who go to Ren Fairs. I think they're fantastic. So there's difference in value judgment. What do I have to add to that to make it bad, shitty, oppressive? What's the X? Okay, think about that, and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, here it is. I don't have a nice little bullet point for that. I just felt like this seemed like a paragraph. It's the action you attach to it. It's the I see difference and I attach value to that. That's not bad. It's when you say I see difference, old women are great, and I attach value to that. I like them more to old men, and then you do something about that. You take away old men's rights, or you say, oh, you old man, you are stupid and bad and wrong. Oh, we're back to stupid, right? That is, you make a group feel bad because they are different. So it's the action. It's not enough to see the difference. Seeing difference isn't bad. We are different. There's nothing wrong with seeing it. There's nothing wrong with attaching value to my group is great. I love my group. Um, it's when we then add negative actions to it, actions that oppress people or make them feel bad about themselves. That's when difference goes bad. So I get this picture of these black kids, and clearly in a crappy school. And you don't know this, but I know this was taken in the 1940s when in the rest of America, kids had heated schoolrooms, probably not air conditioned, but heated schoolrooms with rows of desks and chalkboards. And these kids do not have that. That's difference. We see that these are black kids. Um, and we've attached value to that. They're bad. And how do we know that? Because we see their room. And then we have defunded their education so that they will never ever, well, they won't never ever, but it's harder to succeed in a world where you say education matters and then you don't let everybody have access to it. That's the bad. The bad part is the actions. Yeah, it's not enough for somebody to say something about you. You have to do something about it. Well, saying things can be bad too. You know what I mean? It's complicated. It's not just that difference is bad. That's my point. Yeah? Okay. All of this stuff we do today is both unbelievably simple. Power, yeah. Difference, yeah. And complicated. They're all complicated. Anyway, got it? So, okay. We've done 2 of our 4 terms. Woo! Moving right along. All right, next slide. Oh man, here's a tough one. Race. Here's what I can do. I can tell you what race isn't. That's the easy part. Race isn't skin color. If we were in a classroom, what we would know is that most of us are in kind of the same tonal range. Some of us are paler, some of us are darker, some of us have yellow undertones in our skin, some of us have olive tones under our skin, some of us have pink tones under our skin. But if you had, my husband was in construction, he was a professional painter and wall covering guy for all his life, and he had this cool thing called a fan deck, and it was really like a little fanned out thing of paint chips, all the colors, all the greens, all the browns, all the blues, all the teals, all the pinks, all the purples, all of those. And if you took the color of us in a room, you could find us all on one strip of that fan deck, and the rest of us, there's a whole bunch of colors we're not, right? Okay, I'm not saying we're all the same color. I'm just saying race isn't about color. When I'm tan, I'm probably browner than a lot of my students. That doesn't make them white and me not white. I'm white no matter how tan I am, right? Yeah. Ooh, and all the privilege that goes with that. Go me. Anyway, it's not ethnicity, not race, because it's race. We know race is something about identification, personal identification, but it's also about how you get lumped by a society. So, for example, we have in America this group of people we call Hispanics, or Latinos, or Latinas, or Latinx, or pick your phraseology. But we also know that we have in just here in Southern California, we have people who look fairly alike. Some people we have people that are Hispanic in California who've been here for generations, that have been here longer than lots of us white people. We have recent immigrants from Mexico. We have immigrants who came here in the 20s and 30s, so they're third generations American. We have immigrants from El Salvador. We have immigrants from countries in South America. And you're not all alike. We have this group in America called Asians. Oh my God. And to be fair, most white people can't tell you apart, but you guys can. And you have different ethnicities. You have the Filipinos and the Japanese and the Chinese and the Thai and the Vietnamese and the Laotians, and I could go on and on and on. So it's not ethnicity. Race isn't ethnicity. They're related. They're like maybe second cousins, but it's not that. It's not biological. Racist scientists have spent a lot of time trying to figure out, and this goes way back to the late 1800s, trying to figure out, they were mostly trying to prove that white people were biologically, anatomically superior to not white people. Um, and sometimes they did anatomical examinations of people, alive and dead. where they found these differences. But it turns out none of those differences are actually there. For a long time, they imagined somehow that white people had bigger brains. Well, we know that that's not true. Not only do we know it just from common sense, but we also know that science has discounted that. It's simply not true. That is, there is no DNA of race. I'm not saying that like some racial groups don't have DNA variations based on melatonin or sometimes like even likelihood of diseases. But nonetheless, we're all human. We all have way more in common than we have apart, and there's no genetic difference between us. If I need a kidney transplant, I don't need a kidney from another white person. I can have a kidney from anyone because all our kidneys are alike. Yeah? Okay, so that's the easy part. That's what race is not. Oh my goodness. Now we have to do the hard thing. So what is it? Let's go to the next slide. All right, here it is. Best I can do it. Because if you Google this, you're going to get 300 answers. So you're going to see what I mean. Best I can do it. This really is the best I can do, and I've been doing this for a long time. Race is a culturally constructed, it's a cultural construction of difference used to group people. It says that there in number 1. A cultural construction of difference used to group people. What's a cultural construction? It's some group of ideas made up by culture or a bunch of people in a culture or a society. So it's a cultural construction. Vegetables are good for you. That's both a cultural construction, that is an idea that the society is made up, but it's also one based in reality. Can I think of a better cultural construction? Werewolves are hot. Okay, that's a cultural construction because 1, werewolves don't exist, and so 2, they can't actually be hot. Also, just so you know, under a TMI thing, I don't think werewolves are hot. Oh God, thank goodness. All right, so race is a cultural construction, a thing the culture makes of difference used to group people. 2, societies and cultures only group people for one reason. Honest to God. Why? You don't put people in groups for the fun of it. You put people in groups because you need groups. Why do you need groups in cultures? Difference grouping exists for the purposes of assigning power to some groups and not others. Ba-dum-bum! Ooh, fun. Anyway, so race is a cultural construction of difference. It's used to group people. We group people because we need we need to create us-thems, and whoever we is. And that oftentimes power groups will say, we are us, say in America, white people, or even more specifically white men, or even more specifically than that, white men with economic privilege. Us good, them, everybody else bad. And then you can divide, what you do in America is you divide the them up into, there's the black them, the brown them, the Asian them, the gay them, all the other thems, and then you set those people at war with each other so they never ever fight their real problem, rich white guys. Anyway, race is a cultural construction of difference used to group people to disempower them. Yeah, that's not very satisfying. Kind of what it is. Let's go to the next slide. Here, I've done it again for you. Race is a culturally constructed category of difference. Here's the key here. That changes through time as cultures change. For a long time, for example, in American history, white was a group that did not include Italian immigrants or Irish immigrants. The notion was that the Irish and the Italians were way too different. See my rabbit ears around those words. To be categorized as white, primarily because they were Catholics. And so maybe such very, very poor immigrants, but mostly because they weren't Protestants. Protestants in the room, beware, your group has got some problems. All the groups have problems, let's not kid ourselves, but Protestants in America have historically been as good about assigning difference to non-Protestants as white people have been at assigning difference to not white people. Anyway, it's a culturally constructed category of difference that changes through time, because now people of Italian or Irish descent are firmly and clearly white. We're not confused about that. The good news is our culturally constructed notions of race can change through time. So what I don't like is when students will say, we've always been racist and we always will be. I think that's a load of bullpucky. Um, yes, we haven't, I don't know I don't know who we is and we have always been racist. I don't know how far back in history before we don't find racism, but I suspect there is a point in history where we don't find that. And we don't know that we'll always be because we don't have time machines. But what we do know is because it is not a thing rooted in nature. It is not gravity or Earth's rotation around the sun. It's a set of ideas, and we can change those. Racism can change. We can make it go away. How do we do that? There's a lot of steps to that. I suspect that every generation has got its group of people working that. I think the younger generation has a lot of people working on that. But it's cultural construction. It changes through time. Other than that, it's really hard to define more clearly. Because it's a cultural construction and race is about meeting certain cultural needs about power, it can be super shifty. So we all talk about it like we know what it means, when we may not. Yeah? Next slide. All right, so this is what I was talking about it being complicated. That the impulse is to say it's hard to define, but we know it when we see it. I know what race is I know race is when I see it, and I know what racism is when I see it. It's so obvious. I'm like, you look at that, no dogs and Chinese allowed. Wow, that's some racist shit. But I also know this sign is from the 1920s and 30s, and by 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States got very anti-Japanese and started rounding up Japanese Americans and putting them in camps for no other reason than they were Japanese Americans. And in Los Angeles, lots of Chinese Americans got really nervous, and for good reason, because the people rounding up the Japanese Americans couldn't tell the difference. So while the sign is clearly racist, the world that sign lives in had a little trouble discerning what race was what race, because again, cultural constructions of other. There are these people who look vaguely Asian that we decided we don't like. Some for real reasons, their relatives bombed Pearl Harbor, and some for stupid reasons. None of the people living in America bombed Pearl Harbor, and have you had sushi? That's trivializing, but you know what I mean. The other sign here about contractors and no Irish need apply. This one's from probably the late 1800s. And again, sort of this notion that the Irish were not white because they were Catholic, and also because, I guess because they drank, but which is interesting because they're going to pay people in money and in whiskey, but they don't want the Irish. But there's this notion, and I think it still exists, and we laugh about it, but it is racist, this notion that the Irish are drunks. I'm related. My husband's Irish. He's pretty sober most of the time. He's a nice guy. He's out there weed whacking right now, like I said. He'll have 2 beers after dinner. He'll be done. Anyway, and how do you tell the Irish? I mean, unless they're like running around in leprechaun outfits with orange curly hair, how do you tell them? So again, we can say this is a racist thing, and it is, but how do we see the race in the moment? And then there's this other thing about, I would say, if you had a racist anonymous, right? This sort of some sort of 12-step meeting that racists could go to where they could admit they were racists and get the F over it. Nobody would go because I don't think anyone in America thinks they're racist. Indeed, we know white supremacists, when polled, don't think they're racist. Indeed, their position is, I'm not a racist, I'm just for my group. My group is white people, and I'm for my group, and my group is being oppressed, and I'm just standing up for them. It's not that I hate brown people. I just like my white people. Yeah. Dude, we know you're racist. We're not confused. But the people in the midst of the worst kind of American racism, the big, sloppy, obvious stuff, don't even see it. It's hard to see racism. So we have to be careful we start pointing fingers about it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying you should never call anyone or anything out for being racist. But I also think we have to be super careful about it. And I also think we have to understand that pointing it out has never helped. I'm not, again, not saying you shouldn't, but pointing at a white supremacist and saying you're a racist doesn't get you anywhere because they don't think you are. I don't know how you fix those people. I genuinely don't. And I will tell you honestly, I'm related to some of those people. And I have, in my 60 years of being alive, not been able to fix my siblings and parents. I don't know. It's super complicated. Yeah. Next slide. All right. So we know race and racism when we see it, or that's what we say. Like, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. It's so obvious, but maybe we don't always know when we see it. Like, we look at these two signs. No dogs and Chinese allowed. Ooh, that is some racist shit. But here's the thing. I know for a fact that sign is a product of the 1920s and 30s and this immense anti-Chinese sentiment in Los Angeles. That is a sign from Los Angeles. And that come 1941, the Japanese in Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and America responded by rounding up all the Japanese Americans, some of them who've been here for generations, and all of them who had chosen to leave Japan to come here, rounded them up and put them in camps for being the enemy. And when they were rounding up Japanese Americans in Los Angeles, the officials doing that sort of work didn't struggle to differentiate the Japanese from the Chinese. They couldn't see the racial differences, nor did anyone doing it think it was racist. They thought it was a necessary thing that you did during the war. Of course it was racist. Nobody saw it. Most white supremacists don't think they're racist. Of course they're racist. But when polled, they say they're not. They say, it's not that I don't like brown people. It's not that I'm a racist asshole. Dude, you are. But it's not that, they say. It's that I'm pro-white. I am white. I am pro my group. We are being oppressed. We're being oppressed. We're being oppressed. See the violence inherent in the system. That's a little Monty Python quote for those of you in the know. Anyway, if the worst sort of American racists, white supremacists, don't know they're racist, that tells you something about how hard it is to think about race and racism in America. It's so complicated. And I don't have any answers about it. I just wanted to sort of put some nuance on this. As we go forward in class, the point here isn't to explain race to you or anything else. The point is that we come into this class establishing that this stuff is complicated and nuanced, and we're doing our best. Yeah? Of course we are. We're Californians. Woohoo! Here's our fourth and last term, gender. Oh, gender. I will say that it is a lot easier to explain this than, say, 28 years ago when I first started. Back then, I had to convince students that gender wasn't biology, or that gender wasn't a code woman for women, or, chicks, man. That is, when we talk about gender in America, we're not talking about the girl people, and we're not talking about our sex or our biology. If we were in a classroom, what I would say now here is I would motion to myself, and I'm a 60-year-old white lady of a certain earth goddessy shape. I'm a sturdy girl, and I dressed like a hippie granola with the Birkenstocks and the scarves and the crystal earrings, and I have short blue hair. And I would say to you, when I walked in this room, you knew I was a woman. And you didn't know I was a woman because you saw my parts. You didn't see my parts. You're never going to see my parts. You're welcome for not seeing my parts. And invariably, some student will say, well, I see, that you have breasts. And I'm like, you don't. You see breast-shaped things under clothes. I could have anything in there. Socks. RuPaul has magnificent breasts when he's in his RuPaulness, and we know RuPaul doesn't have breasts. So, and you didn't see my breasts. You saw my t-shirt. No one's going to see my breasts. You're welcome. So we don't know we never, unless you know somebody physically, intimately, you can't know their sex. You can only know what they say their sex is, or what they present their sex as. And that presentation, that's gender. And everybody's got gender. So when we talk about gender, again, we're not talking about just women. All right? Cool. Let's see what the next slide is. Gender is a lot like race in that it is a culturally constructed set of ideas, but it's a set of ideas about womanhood and manhood. Um, and it's way more complicated than that. Don't think for just a second I fell for the binary nonsense. I didn't. But if we think about gender as being a continuum, which we will, and we'll look at some slides later about that, and we put womanhood on one side, let's put it on the left, and let's put manhood on the right, and then we draw a line between them. That's our continuum. But still, that's constructing the notion of gender wherever you are on the spectrum, and it's all cool with Peg. Wherever you are on that spectrum, nonetheless, the notions of womanhood and manhood set the parameters for that spectrum. Yeah? Okay. These ideas are dependent on culture, and they change through time. So what might have been womanly in one time is no longer. For example, I was just watching one of my favorite fashion history YouTubers talk about the history of pink and blue, and for a long time in probably American and probably European history, babies weren't assigned pink and blue. Pink and blue wasn't considered girl and blue boy. Rather, was a notion that you dress babies all in white, all of them, and then you left them all until they were potty trained in these little like gowns, like dresses. So you didn't even have gender differentiated clothes where like girls wore cute little pink ruffly dresses and boys wore little blue overalls. That all the little kids wore white because white's easy to launder. It's easy to use bluing on, which is the early version of bleach. It's easy to get stains out of. And you can watch a huge load of white things and get them, especially poopy white things or pee white things, and get them pretty clean if you use bleach or bluing, these sort of early chemicals, right? So this notion that girls wear pink and boys wear blue is a culturally constructed idea, and it is, in terms of the span of human history, very, very recent. So again, these ideas are based on culture. In the same way that, for example, my stepson married an Indian American woman. That is, her parents are from India, and her wedding dress was red. It was fantastic. But our cultural notions is that girls wear white at wedding, and her cultural notion was that women, did not wear white at weddings because white's bad color. I don't want to do the whole Indian wedding thing here, especially when I'm not an expert. Some of you are, and I don't want to offend you with my dumbness. But these ideas are culturally constructed. They change from place, they change through time, just like our ideas about race. I was looking at the word manhood here. Note about manhood. Gender is about womanhood, ideas about what it's like to be a woman, a girl, to be feminine, and ideas about manhood, ideas about masculinity, maleness, etc., etc., and the spectrum, the string in between those two things. So everybody has gender. Manhood is gender. Womanhood is gender. I think these are things you guys are better at now. I think 20 years ago I had to spend some time on this because my students really did think gender was just a code word for girl stuff. And I don't think any of you think that anymore. So here's the thing that I always say. All of us have gender. Maybe not all cis-normative, straight, biologically determined, lined up gender, but we all have it. And not only do all people have, well, that's not true because there are people who are agender. Yeah, it's so complicated. But also some things that aren't people have gender. Shall we take a look at that? All right, next slide. So in the classroom, I used to say, let's play the gender game. And then I would shout out things, and then the students would tell me what gender they were. Here, instead of shouting things out and you shouting back at me, because you can shout at the PowerPoint all you want, and that's not going to do you any good. Here's some pictures. I like the green Volkswagen Bug because I used to own one, and my green Volkswagen Buzz had pink flame decals on the side, and it had eyelashes. That was What's the gender of that car? That is some girly shit. And I purposely picked the green one, not only because I used to own one, because I think if I'd given you a pink car, that's easy. But we all know that the bug is a girl car, whereas the monster truck, or really any truck, but I picked the most exaggerated, ridiculous truck. And by the way, guys, you know what we all think when we see you in one of these big, ridiculous trucks? Ladies, do you want to tell them? Okay, it's not good. I'm just telling you. Imagine me holding my pinky up in the air. How about that? Do that. Anyway, so why is the Beetle gendered feminine and the truck gendered masculine? I know it's partially about the way they're used. It's partially about their shape. You can't say it's because who drives them, because that kind of stuff again is also culturally constructed. My husband drove my Volkswagen Beetle. It's gone now. It's moved on, and now I drive a bright blue Mini Cooper. Ooh, what a surprise! Um, I can drive our Dodge pickup, and he can drive my Cooper, and all of our parts stay intact, and we all get where we're going. So it's not about that. It's about other things. The Volkswagen is small. It is curvy. I will also point out it's significantly cheaper than a truck. Yeah, it uses fewer resources. Oh, ooh, salads and steaks. Food has gender. Yeah, salads are girly, steaks are manly. Why is that? Again, I think it's partially about resources. Steak is not only more expensive, it takes up more resources to make. There's sort of a notion that girls are supposed to be small. We're not supposed to eat much. We're supposed to be, I guess, delicate. God forbid we eat a steak and french fries and pound a couple of milkshakes and then belch. Well, nobody should belch. That's gross. Um, cheese bag. Now I miss manners. But anyway, so if you think about it for a second, just take a few things, like look around your room or just think, like what other kinds of things are gendered and what kinds of things aren't. Like in my house, my laptop is gendered as feminine because I've got this pretty cover with pink flowers on it. And it's the thing I use. My husband is an ex-construction worker. He's not a computer guy. The laptop in my house is a girly thing. And then all the power tools are manly things. But the power tools that live in the kitchen, the blender, the food processor, the KitchenAid, those are all girly things. Why? It's not their horsepower. I think because the KitchenAid's I think I could pull a truck. I could pull a truck with my KitchenAid. It's about who uses it. It's about where it lives. Lives in the kitchen. The kitchen is a gendered place. Rooms have gender. I could go on. You got it? You've got it. You're so smart. Next slide. Okay, so the key here is gender isn't sex. I think you have that. Salads and drugs don't have. See, because like sex is about your parts, your genitalia, your penis, your vagina, your breasts, etc., etc. Salads and trucks don't have parts. They don't make babies, and yet they're gendered. Lots of things have gender. We just did that. Oh, we did this whole talk. The exception to this are intersex people, which have the DNA and genitalia of both sexes. So you might have a intersex car. There are vehicles that are very clearly gendered, and then vehicles that are maybe not as gendered. What could not be gendered? I don't know. See, I would need you in the room. Who's got a car that you think isn't gendered either male or female? But you know the answer to that, right? So there are intersex or maybe agendered vehicles, food. Not all the foods gendered. Not all the spaces in our house are gendered, etc., etc. Yeah? Next slide. Here's another thing that you know that used to be harder to teach, but you've got this. Gender's not binary. So at first, let's set out binary. I think it's a word we throw around a lot, but just so you know, it's two things in opposition to each other. So black, white, male, female, apple, orange, right and wrong. I'm trying looking around my room, trying to think of some other things. Inside, outside. All those are all binary things. And again, binaries are also culturally constructed in the main. I mean, it is true that inside and outside are real, actual differences that are opposite, but apple and orange isn't. Apples and oranges aren't really opposites. It's just something we've decided. Why not apple grapes? Why not grapes Doritos? Those actually are opposite, except they're all food. Blue pink, that again, cultural construction. Truck beetle, cultural construction. So some binaries are real, inside outside, and some are cultural constructions. I guess you could argue that inside outside is a construction, but it is a function of how we build houses to have clear insides. But if we were in a climate with less ruinous heat or cold or rain, we might have a place where the inside and outside flowed together, and then you wouldn't have that binary. So binaries exist in our minds, and thus they're real. I'm always reminded of that scene at the last Harry Potter movie after Voldemort has, quote, killed Harry, and Harry and Dumbledore are in this white place, and Harry says to Dumbledore, is this real? Is it happening in my mind? And Dumbledore essentially says, what's the difference? And if you're like, geez, Peg, you're such a dork. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for noticing. Next slide. So again, the key to this binary thing is that gender isn't binary. If it was, there'd be two genders. And I know there's people in America who still think that, and maybe people in this class who still think that. And if you do, love you, but you're wrong. There's not just two genders. There's not just male and female. There aren't even two sexes. Um, one out of two, not 1,999 people out of 2,000 are born with either male parts or female parts. I was born with female parts, straight up female parts. But one out of 2,000 people are born with a mix of both. And you might think, well, that's not very many. But really, if you think about it, there's like 15 million people in Southern California. One out of 2,000 is a lot of people. I could do the math, but I don't want to because, I'm a history professor. Um, uh, those people who are born with some mix of the parts, the biology is mixed. Those people are intersex people. So even the notion that sex is binary is not entirely true. So it's not that sex is a spectrum, but intersex people can have different mixes of the parts and be all kinds of delightfully different. But gender is a spectrum, and I think you know that. We hear that a lot. Gender is a spectrum, and where by we I mean all of you guys, you in your room and me in my room, we enact our genders. We pick them, and our genders might change from day to day. You might enact something one day and be somebody slightly different the next day, or completely different. They also change through time. Your gender enactment when you're in your 20s might be very different from your gender enactment in your 60s as you become more truly and fully you and give yourself permission to be that person. Or just, change. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the next slide, shall we? Oh, more complicated. Some people say there are 4 genders. I don't know. I struggle with this, but I put it up here because there's a lot of people who say this, and if you Google gender, you're going to run into this. They say there's 4 types of genders: masculine gender, the feminine gender, the neuter, or I like neuter better than neuter. Neuter sounds like something terrible I did to my boy dog, right? That's not cool. Um, they say neuter denotes non-living or lifeless things too, and I checked that on the internet and found it too. So I guess my printer is neuter. But I don't know. I think people can be neutral too. And then common gender, which denotes neither male nor female, which sounds like gender fluid. I'm not sure. I gotta tell you, I'm not crazy about this list, but I give it to you because one, you would find it out there if you searched it, and two, I think it helps us with this notion that this stuff is complicated and we're still figuring it out. I'm not sure I buy this list, but a lot of people do. Yeah? Okay. Here's, I think, a better list, and as it says up here at the top, other people say there's 10 or more gender identities. This is not the gender class. This is not that class, and if it was that class, I probably am not equipped to teach it, though I think I'm more equipped than a lot of 60-year-old people. But nonetheless, it's not that class. I don't want to drown in this, but I did want to sort of nail down that I wanted you to know that I knew, and I also think some of you are curious about this kind of stuff. So there's lots. If you look up gender identities, you'll get all sorts of them. I just put sort of the top ones that you'll hear that we all recognize here on this list. It is in no way complete. If you use language that is not on this list, I do not want you to feel unseen. I just didn't want to use 78 slides for this. These are the most common ones. It's just giving us an idea. Okay, so we have agender, having no gender. I go back to the neuter thing. I hate that word. That's gruesome. But anyway, cisgender, that's like people whose gender correspond with their biological sex. I am cisgender. I wish I was more exciting, but I'm not. I've got girl parts and I identify as a woman. Yeah, wow. Cool. It's cool to be normative. Gender fluid, so that's a person who expresses different genders in different days. So if one day I was like, today I'm going to be girly, but tomorrow I'm going to be dudeish, I can be gender fluid. And that's not just about changing my clothes. That's about a lot more stuff. Don't need to. And then gender queer, which is like gender fluid, but also I think gender queer people more just consistently live in some place in the middle of the spectrum. Sometimes gender nonconforming gets used with genderqueer. Some people define it as slightly different. Close enough. And then transgender, these are people who identify as a different gender than the one assigned to them. So I was born with female parts, but if I felt in my heart of hearts that I was a man and I performed my daily life, because that's what we do with our lives, we perform them. If I performed my daily life as a man, not just man clothes, but I was essentially all the other stuff that come along with manhood, all the good stuff, not the toxic shit, all the good stuff, then I would be a trans man and not and a biological woman. Um, anyway, oh yeah. So the things that make the conservatives crazy. Yepers. Okay, I think we're almost done. Let's look at the next slide and finish this thing up and get out of here, huh? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so here's our sum up. Power is complicated, and no one ever has all the power, because people resist. Resistance is the key to understanding history, at least the way I teach it, yeah. Race is culturally constructed and difficult to define. We don't always know it when we see it, but it exists and it describes difference, and it doesn't have to be bad. Again, back to difference. Difference isn't bad. Gender is culturally constructed just like race. It's not binary, it's on a spectrum. Everyone has gender. You know what, I bet we could think it's super helpful to think about races on a spectrum too. Like we think about racial boxes. Oh, I'm backing up. But anyway, it's not, most of us are more than one thing. Or lots of us are. But anyway, spectrum's there. Oh, everything's a spectrum, and that's cool too. So everybody has a gender, not just women or queer people. And it's all complicated because these terms are about personal identity. They're also about regional and national politics. They're about for some people, they're about hate. Um, they're really, all these ideas are complicated, and the point of starting a History 1 class with this talk was to get us thinking in nuanced ways, that power is complicated. Much of really what I teach in this class and what we're going to do for the next 14 weeks is talk about the ways in which some group has power and another group has less power, and how those groups meet and negotiate some understanding of that power difference. And that negotiation usually entails resistance by the disempowered group, and then resistance by the powered group to the resistance. Aha, the teeter-totter. Anyway, that's the point. Okay? So, here's the thing. You have finished your first lecture. That was easy. You should have been taking notes. Notes does not mean copying and pasting my slides onto a piece of paper. You can write your own bullet points and your own thoughts and things. Some kids use people. Some students use different colored pens. Some students handwrite these things. Some students type these things. It's all cool. In fact, don't care as long as you do the notes. And then once you've done the notes, you can upload them to the link in the module, and get ready for the next week. Yeah, and we'll start the actual history next week. So that'll be thrilling. The other lectures will probably be longer than this too, because I used to give these lectures in class, and they would take me about an hour 20, hour and 30 to do. So this is a short one. The rest of them will be longer. Yeah? You did good? Was that all right? I hope it was all right. I wish I could see you. Okay, have a good time. Today, don't forget to have some fun so that you can feel happy, because we want you to feel good. We, the royal we, me, and my friend the queen. Anyway, you know what I mean. Be nice to yourself. Be as nice to yourself as you would other people. Upload your homework. See you in the next module. Okay. Bye, peeps.